Socks by Heather Haven. Narrated by Gary Meadows. Mr. Lipschitz stood in front of his sock drawer with utter contempt. Somehow, in the past 3 days, it had become completely disorganized, and that would not do. No, that simply would not do. The exacting man believed there should be a place for everything, and everything should be in its place. His 4-bedroom, 2-bath Victorian house with working fireplace was as neat as a pin at all times. Correction. He had been assured it was a working fireplace when he purchased the foreclosure, but, of course, wood fires are extremely unneat. Electric heat is cleaner. So even though the recently vanished Mrs. Lipschitz preferred a working fireplace, it had never been used. He slammed the sock drawer closed in a flash of anger. There resulted a bang of wood against wood. The display of emotion surprised him. He didn't usually show his displeasure except to Mrs. Lipschitz. Going out for groceries, indeed. His sainted mother had been right. Deny his wife money, and she'd be gone. He ran a bony finger over the surface, checking the drawer and surrounding polished wood for damage. His mother's cherry wood gentleman's dresser, with its elegant silver and onyx inlay, gleamed back at him, unharmed. The gaunt man took a step back, and once again admired the lines of the Art Deco piece coveted by many a private collector. "My apologies, my friend, for losing my temper," he said with a slight bow. "It certainly isn't anything you've done, and won't happen again." Glancing at his wristwatch, he crossed the room, appreciating the thick Persian carpet beneath his feet. He relished the memory of how he garnered it for a ridiculously low price at auction several years ago. Then he headed down his 18th-century carved mahogany staircase toward the living room. Being a certified public accountant may have been his livelihood, but his life's work was attaining treasures at discounted prices. He made it his business to find out who was in desperate need of money, declaring bankruptcy, going out of business, or had passed over, as his own sainted mother had done 5 years before. Of course, it did help that his mother had left him quite a legacy upon her passing, a point of which the not currently present Mrs. Lipschitz had reminded him countless times. Through the years he had obtained many fine pieces, and his home reflected his exquisite taste and acquisitional habits. The contents of his home became not only his possessions, but steadfast friends. Mr. Lipschitz stepped into the living room and surveyed it with immense satisfaction. His eyes beheld the sparkling amethyst and lead crystal chandelier, fine paintings, porcelain figurines, museum-quality furniture, and rare oriental rugs, all obtained for a fraction of their value by his cunning negotiating and bidding skills. "Show me a person in a perilous position," he would say, "and I will show you an anxious seller. Therefore, wherever there was a venue for the luckless or needy, Mr. Lipschitz would be there, checkbook in hand." He stopped before the marble mantel of his fireplace and looked again at his platinum watch, another fabulous buy from a suicidal stockbroker. It was nearly 1/4 to the hour. Focusing his attention upon the antique Swiss clock, he grasped his restless hands behind his back and waited. He had procured this fine example of an antique cuckoo clock 8 months previous. Over 200 years old, it contained 3 sets of elaborate, moving figures, each announcing the hour, half-hour, and quarter-hour, accompanied by intricate musical chimes. It was the quarter-hour which worried him. A yellow-haired maiden would appear carrying 2 milk buckets, a bluebird resting in one of them. As the girl glided in her arc across the facade of the clock from left to right, a small brown dog followed her. The dog was supposed to wag its tail in its passage, but so far had not. That was unacceptable. Since purchasing the clock, Mr. Lipschitz labored over it in his basement workshop every evening from 7:45 until 9:30 p.m. exactly. With the aid of manuals, obscure springs, complex parts, and lengthy conversations with experts, Mr. Lipschitz felt he had finally achieved his goal. After reconnecting all working parts the previous evening, now was the supreme test. Would the dog repeat his performance on the mantelpiece, thereby promising a twice-hourly repetition for many years to come? Mr. Lipschitz waited anxiously as the clock began to chime. The small door on the left side opened and the milkmaid began her journey from one side to the other. Soon a small brown dog followed her, wagging its tail. Mr. Lipschitz was elated. "You're a good boy," he said to the dog. "A good boy." With a sense of accomplishment, Mr. Lipschitz sat down at his heirloom grand piano, opened the lid, stretched his fingers, and prepared to play as he did every evening before dinner. He would begin again the second movement of Mozart's Piano Concerto No. 6 in B-flat, and it would be only that piece until it was perfected. His fingers hovered over the keys, then came to rest in his lap. Mr. Lipschitz pursed his lips. An errant thought came into his mind, jarring this perfect moment. What was going on inside his sock drawer? He reflected on the procedure. Each sock was clipped together with its mate before putting them into the hamper. They were washed in the machine and still clipped, placed into the dryer. After they were dried, only then were they unclipped, folded neatly and placed according to color into the sock drawer of his fine gentleman's dresser. In the unlikely event there appeared a matchless sock, the sock was carefully placed to the left side of the sock drawer until the recalcitrant mate reappeared. That happened only once, when he had foolishly allowed the now missing Mrs. Lipschitz to do his laundry. It never happened when he did the laundry himself, until lately. For the past few days, more and more pairs were coming out of the dryer sans clips and sans mates. The left side of the drawer was becoming filled with matchless socks. Just how many, he wondered. Discarding his normal routine, he rose to return to his bedroom to find out. He went to his walk-in closet, picked up one of the 2 empty wooden laundry baskets kept there for such an occasion, and returned to the gentleman's dresser. Opening it, Mr. Lipschitz removed all the socks and placed them inside the basket. With a sense of distaste, he carried the basket down the stairs, into the kitchen, and emptied it onto the original 1920s white porcelain table that had once lived in the kitchen of Hearst Castle. He separated the mateless socks into pairs and colors, then bit his lower lip to keep from crying out. 1 blue, 2 odd black, and 4 various shades of brown mateless wonders stared up at him as he stared down at them. He counted no less than 7 missing socks before slipping a nitroglycerin tablet between yellowing teeth to quell an erratic heart. "This will not do," Mr. Lipschitz said aloud. He gathered up the socks and strode into the laundry room. He stood there in the square white room, complete with a low stone-hewn garden sink. Across from the sink sat the washing and drying machines, acquired from the sale of an MIA soldier's possessions. He studied the washer, clean, white, and new. "No, you are all right," he decided, patting the top-loading washer several times on the lid. "Everything is all right going in and coming out of you." He turned to the dryer. It also sparkled clean, new and white. "But you, I believe you to be the troublemaker. What have you done with my socks?" He kicked the dryer squarely in the center of the door. Waving the offending socks in the air, he hurled them down on top of the appliance. His deceased mother's Piquet Cafe curtains quivered in the window from the slight movement of air. The man repeated the question. "Well, what have you done with my socks?" "I ate them," a deep bass voice replied, resonating within the small room. Shocked, Mr. Lipschitz backed up and in doing so tripped over his own feet and fell into the Tuscan garden sink containing seedlings ready to be planted in his pristine and well-organized garden. "Who said that?" he asked, wiping dirt and small leaves from the back of his slacks. He looked around for the source. "Who said that?" "I did, you prissy butthole. You asked me what I did with them, and I told you. Now go away." The voice seemed to come from the dryer. Mr. Lipschitz stared at it, his eyes wide with fear. What did you say?" He clutched at the sink behind him. "I said go away, you sniveling snot rag. What are you, deaf, as well as ugly?" The masculine voice took on more of a grating tone with each word it spoke. "Get lost. Take a hike. Or give me more socks. Is that clear enough for you?" Mr. Lipschitz fought to remain calm, his mind racing. This could not be an intruder. He would have heard the alarm go off. He tested it every day. The doors and windows of his home were locked always. The security system was sophisticated and on, as it was every single moment of every single 24 hours in a day, unless he was in the garden or garage, where he had not been for several days. He had been toiling downstairs in his shop on the Dog's Tail. "How can this be happening? What's going on?" he said as he looked all around him. Hey, chortled the dryer. "Gotcha, didn't I?" All right, that's enough," Mr. Lipschitz replied with a bravado he was not feeling. "This joke has gone on long enough. Whoever you are, come out from behind the clothes dryer. This is not funny." "Look, you moronic imbecile, you pathetic excuse for a man. Do you think anybody could be standing behind me mouthing off and not be seen?" Even though less than a 6-inch space existed between the wall and the dryer, Mr. Lipschitz nonetheless craned his neck around to the side of the dryer to see if someone was hiding. No one was there. "I don't understand," he stuttered. "You're such a frickin' dickhead," the dryer said and began to laugh raucously. "Stop using language like that," Mr. Lipschitz reprimanded. "This is my house and I won't stand for it." "Oh, you won't you? If you don't like my language, leave the room. But before you do, throw me a sock. I'm hungry." "Shut up! How dare you talk to me like that? You're just a dryer." "Up yours," the machine drawled. "Got any more blue ones? Those are my favorite. Must be something about the dye." The dryer made a smacking sound. "Yummy." "Why, you miserable piece of tin," Mr. Lipschitz shouted. He bent over and opened the dryer door, looking inside for a hidden child or midget. "Want to climb in and take a ride, buttface? It'll cost you one pair of socks and maybe your jockey shorts." Mr. Lipschitz kicked at the sides of the dryer, scuffing his bally Oxfords. Then he grabbed both sides of the dryer and began to shake it wildly. "Shut up, shut up, shut up," he cried again and again. The room echoed with his voice, raspy intakes of breath, and the sounds of clanking metal mixed with strident laughter. His mother's curtains quivered again and again. "Ooh, you're scaring me now," the appliance said with a chortle. "What are you going to do, you wuss? You haven't got what it takes to pull me off my foundation. I'm bolted in. Face it, you jackass. Give up and throw me more socks." A scream of rage erupted from the depths of Mr. Lipschitz's very being. He took hold of the back of the dial plate with one hand, the dryer opening with the other, and began rocking back and forth with all his might. The more he pulled and pushed, the more the dryer taunted him. His face turned red and sweat poured from his body. His muscles strained, ached, and then trembled. Finally, the bolts that secured the dryer to its frame began to rip loose with a shrill, tearing sound. Mr. Lipschitz was beyond hearing that. He was too busy feeling the searing, hot pain in his chest right before he pulled the dryer on top of him. The next morning, the back door was unlocked and a middle-aged woman peeked inside. She stepped over the threshold, turning off the warning pings of the alarm system, and tiptoed across the room to the stiff hand protruding from beneath the dryer. She ascertained that dead was dead and went to the wall behind the dryer. Humming a smart tune, she withdrew a small tool from her bag and unscrewed the cover to the phone jack. Nestled inside were a small microphone, speakers, and wires. She placed the electronics in her handbag and returned the cover to the wall. Tottering on platform heels, the short, squat woman walked through the house to the living room and toward one of the hand-blown, beveled-edged, double windows framed magnificently in rose-gold brocade. She pulled back one side of the opulent drapes just enough to signal her young and nubile lover in the waiting car. The lover pulled away and left her to the next task. Removing a raw onion wrapped in a hanky plus a cell phone from her bag, she sat down in a genuine Queen Anne walnut wing chair, resplendent in the original blue silk velvet. She dialed 911 while dabbing at her eyes with the onion. As she waited for the operator to answer, Mrs. Lipschitz looked around her and thought, ka-ching, ka-ching.